Hey guys, so welcome to the ninth episode, season 3 of the Teen Whisperer show, where we get to hear the stories and experiences of podcasters and what are the problems that they are facing and how to overcome it. In today's episode, we have a guest who claims that entrepreneurs can party, so as his Instagram handle name, which is partially against all the things that an entrepreneur called Gary Vayner Chuck said. But the content he does and his past experiences says that hard work will pay off. So work hard, play hard, I guess, in a good way, of course. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Scott Stockdale to the show. Man, your name is really hard to pronounce, by the way. And most importantly, he got his annual blueprint. Like, it's full of questions, and I actually did some of it, and it's actually here right now. I'll show you at the end of the show. So, Mr. Stockdale, welcome to the show. Please tell a little bit about yourself and your podcasting career.
Sure, yeah. Thank you so much for having me on, Jeffrey. And it's awesome that you've had a look at the blueprint. I know we were messaging a little bit about it, and some of the questions are very tough, very deep. So it's amazing you've had a go at it. Yeah, like you said, I'm the host of Entrepreneurs Can Party, which is a top 10 rated Apple podcast. And on it, I bring on interesting entrepreneurs who are having fun in their businesses. And I want to kind of show people that business can and ultimately should be fun. So it's not just about doing a tie-up, being in a boardroom. It can, in some cases, be traveling around the world with your best mates and shooting videos for companies like STA Travel, Panasonic, MTV, as one of my guests has done, or DJing around the world and actually just having these awesome parties, as one of my previous guests has also done as a TikTok DJ artist. So yeah, bringing on people who are having fun. That's why I wanted to do it. I want to kind of learn these, not secrets, I guess, but what makes people have fun in their businesses. So ultimately I can implement that on my own one day. So that's what I do on the side, my podcast. And then my day-to-day job is an SEO, so helping companies rank higher on Google so they can get more organic traffic to their sites and hopefully more revenue as well. So very briefly, that is me in a couple of minutes.
Well, I think you actually have something like, me in 2 minutes or 10 minutes, I think. So that's something in your website, I think so. Yeah. Tell me about that. I mean, like you mentioned someone that's the guy who actually made something like that. So tell us a little bit about that.
Sure, yeah. So me in 10 seconds, inspired by a wonderful man called Derek Sivers, who doesn't do that many podcast guest appearances, periods, but he did appear on the Tim Ferriss show, which is one of my sort of all-time favorite podcasts. I think it was last year now. Amazing guy, very humble, and he sold a business called CD Baby for God knows how many millions of pounds about 10 or 20 years ago. And he has one of my favorite, in fact, probably is my favorite book of all time by him, called Anything You Want, which is amazing. And it's only very short. I think it's less than 100 pages. You can blitz through it in an afternoon, which is what I did or have done many a time. And it talks about his life principles. So bringing value to people. And I'm not even going to try and explain everything else because I'm just going to do a disservice. But yeah, that's the man who I got the inspiration from, Derek Sivers. I think there was a link to his website on my website, but I think it's dereksivers.org if your listeners want to find out more about him, because he is a truly amazing guy.
I think for us Indians, the first, not as Indians, like, mostly all over the world, the common question that, the recruiters will ask is, tell me about yourself. That's kind of the first question that many people will ask, so if in case, if I tell them about myself in 10 seconds, obviously they will throw me out of the job. Probably, I think so. So, for those people who just, sometimes it's better to try that in informal ways, I think. And this is my kind of, inference from experience that I have been so far. So yeah, that's actually pretty great. And, this is something crazy because you've been in SEO field for a really a long period of time. So, people actually complained a lot about this content versus algorithm. They will say that, because of the algorithm, it's now slightly pushing up and everything and stuff. So what's your thought on that? Do you think, being SEO guy, do you think it's really matter that algorithm actually matters, or just the content, like the quality and everything and stuff?
Yeah, the algorithm matters for sure. It's constantly changing, constantly updating, and Google is ultimately wanting to provide the best service it can to the people who visit its website, which is pretty much everyone in the Western world and many parts of the Eastern world as well. So I think, yeah, it is important to kind of not game the system, but certainly play up to it. And there are lots of useful things you can be doing for your own websites to rank higher on Google. I should say as well that SEO doesn't just have to apply to Google. It can apply to other search engines like Bing and Yahoo, I guess to a lesser extent Yahoo, but Bing certainly, particularly for older demographics who might not be aware that they can change the settings on their laptops. That's something that's very common. So, when people get a new laptop, they know, okay, I don't want to use Microsoft Edge. It's terrible. Let's use Google Chrome and let's use Google. Other older people might not be aware of they can do that. And also, Amazon, Alexa and voice searches, they all use Microsoft technology as well. So it's useful in that sense to kind of optimize for Google is kind of the main player, but there are Bing as well. Then Amazon SEO as well, which is a whole entirely different beast. YouTube SEO as well for videos. But yeah, I tend to stick to Google, and that's what I do in my day job. But going back to your question about content, is it important? 100% it's important. I think if you can provide quality content that's unique, so not just kind of regurgitating stuff that you see other sites produce, that is the number one way you can rank higher on Google. And more specifically on that, it depends how technical you want to kind of dive into the weeds of it, but things called keywords, which are things that people search for on Google or other internet browsers. So for example, if I wanted to find out about dog training in England, then I might search dog training in England in Google, and you can rank higher in Google by using dog words in England as like what we call a keyword, a word that you thread throughout your content. So typically if you've got a blog post that's like 400 words, then you'd look to have that keyword in that content at least 10, 12 times, or at least synonyms or variations of that keyword. So yeah, there's a lot to SEO, I guess, but like I said, it depends how technical your audience wants to dive into. I'm happy to go into the weeds as much as you'd like me to, but that's a very brief overview.
Yeah, I think, because, coming to SEO and, podcasting and stuff, I had a guest called Scott Carson. So he actually said that, he would obviously transcript the entire podcast and, put it on his website, because that's actually one of the major, traffic driven thing that he's actually getting his podcasters, his audience from. So yeah, I think coming out of this, that's really great. This is actually, I want to ask before, but I actually forgot it, is that you said that as entrepreneurs can party, you said, as your name of your podcast itself, it's kind of a personal question, but how many parties did you went to as an entrepreneur? Mentioning yourself as, something like that. How many parties did you actually went to?
How many parties have I been to?
It's a personal question, but you can be, whatever you want to say. Just say the random number. I guess it's actually good too.
Oh God, it would be a random number. I have no idea. University, I went to way too many parties. It was at least like 3-4 times a week over 3 years. So what's that like? Do the maths quickly.
Oh my God, it seems like memories are coming for you.
It's got to be close to 500, but I'm just making that number up. It could be way more, it could be way less. I love to party. Yeah, that's no secret to my friends, as they know.
Wow, that's awesome. I mean, like, looking at a guy who's actually enjoying his life, I think people will get jealous and, make more money and enjoy a lot after this, hearing this, I think so. Wow.
That'd be amazing if they do. Yeah. I mean, it's one of my kind of principles, I guess, is I like to do things that are, one, fun, ultimately, because I think life is too short to not do that. And obviously there will be times when that's not entirely practical. So the second thing is, am I doing it with people I enjoy doing things with? So whether it's in a working relationship or in kind of a more friendly kind of social setting. And as long as I'm kind of hitting at least one of those in every interaction, then for me, that's kind of a surefire way to have fun. So parties or not, that's just how I try and live my life, I guess.
Wow. That's totally awesome. Don't worry, I won't ask that question again. So this is actually kind of must be an obvious question that, if ever you were in a podcast with someone as a guest, I think people will ask you this, how do you actually got, into the top 10 ranking in Apple Podcast? This is a common question people will obviously ask you. So just tell me something that you haven't told anyone before. Something like that. Tell me something you haven't told. Because obviously, if someone ask me, then I will just obviously tell them that you can go to his podcast. There will be tons of podcasts that he will be on, or even the first 2 or 3 podcasts you must have mentioned that. Tell me something. Tell me a trick that you haven't mentioned before.
To be honest, I'm a very honest and open guy, so I just reveal all to everyone. And I've actually done I've done a blog post which kind of details my entire process from start to finish. So if listeners are interested, scottstockdale.co.uk/rank. And it is, I can't remember how many words, but it took me a while to write it, and it details every step. The thing I do say to people, and I think it's not a secret as such, because obviously I've told it to other people, but it's not something people are always willing to implement. And that is, guesting on other podcasts is, once you've launched your podcast, probably not the easiest way, because obviously it takes effort and it requires a time commitment, but it's one of the best not guaranteed either, but one of the best ways to kind of grow your podcast and grow your listenership. I guess to take it back to your question in terms of like that launch week and actually into the top 10 in 6 days, there was a lot of work that went into that. So I was working probably 6 or 7 months prior to launch, after my 9 to 5. So doing my 9 to 5 and then coming back home, working for a couple of hours each evening on things relating to the podcast, whether it was actually recording the episodes, sort of producing the episodes, arranging to have guests on, doing all the back-end technical stuff, as I'm sure you're aware of being a podcaster. There's quite a bit to that as well. And all of the giveaways and competitions that I did as well, just things like the branding of the podcast, actually having a designer to produce the artwork and things like that. And then taking a podcast course as well, which was really useful over 12 weeks prior to the launch. So yeah, there's a lot of kind of steps involved. And again, it depends how into the depths you want to go, because I appreciate each one of those things could be like an entire podcast in itself. There's quite a lot of depth to it. But just to, I guess the short answer is there was a lot of work that went into it. And, some people launch a podcast and actually it gets traction very quickly and it does really well. Typically that's because they've already got a pre-existing audience, which I didn't have. So, they can leverage their podcast to their audience and get them to listen to it and download it and get those reviews in. But I didn't have that. So I was kind of going from scratch, and that's kind of what I did. That was my process.
So you're actually saying is that if, before launching a podcast, 6 to 7 months of, pure hard work and the exact process, you can actually, get in top 10 in 6 days. Is it possible? If anyone does it, let me know. If anyone does it, is it possible?
I get to think so. I guess there are a few important factors and variables. So one of those is, what is your niche? What category are you looking to rank in? So the category I was looking to rank in, entrepreneurship, even though it is very competitive, it is one of those, I guess, categories that has it's a niche of sorts. It's not like business, for example, which is obviously a lot broader and a lot more competitive to get into. So if you can pick a niche which is less competitive than the bigger, broader categories, that's certainly one variable. And, to take it a step further, if you wanted to go for something like environment, which is, I know a podcaster I know very well, she managed to get into the, I don't know if you're aware, the Apple Podcast New and Noteworthy section, which is essentially like the Billboard charts of Apple Podcasts. If you can get into that section, then it's like on the homepage of Apple Podcasts, and more people can see a podcast essentially and get more exposure that way. So she managed to do that, which was incredible. And actually she has had a really successful launch as well. I'm not sure how high she got in the charts, but just getting into that New and Noteworthy section alone is something I didn't do, and she did incredibly well. So yeah, that's kind of one important variable. To answer your question, can anyone do it? I would like to think if you put in the hard work, if you do the work, if you prepare properly, if you take it seriously, some people, it's just a hobby, and that's of course absolutely fine. And, just kind of your mates doing it on the side and you're just having a laugh with it, not taking it that seriously. If you're wanting to kind of take it to that next level and actually, maybe get into the rankings, or maybe, as I'm hoping to do one day, do this full time and actually make it my career, then I guess it just depends how much work you put in ultimately. But I'd like to think anyone can if they put the work in.
Yeah, I can agree on that. And, this is actually really, fun when someone says that, they want to do podcasting as a full-time gig. Right. So maybe they can earn a lot and everything and stuff. But won't we ever feel like I mean, like, enough is enough at some point. Any job, people always say that, if you're having a passion for something, that, or even if you put a lot of work in, sometime you'll get burnout, even if you're following your own passion. So after the 6 to 7 months, when you're working for that, have you ever felt like that enough is enough it may not work out, that creative block or that stop will always become? How to overcome that? How did you overcome that? Did you have any, first of all?
Yeah, it's one of those where I try not to think about that too much, I guess, because you're absolutely right. That might happen. I might get bored of podcasting in a year's time. I don't think I will, just because I enjoy the conversations I have so much. And actually, for me, it's always the highlight of my week, actually speaking to the likes of yourself on other people's podcasts, but actually, doing the episodes for Entrepreneurs Can Party as well. So yeah, I'd like to think I'll never get bored of it, and I probably won't get burnout, but that's not to say it won't happen. And I guess the answer is I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. I don't have the answer to that per se. I think the one thing that I've kind of seen consistently with my guests on the podcast, and actually, people who have turned their, I guess what you might call their side hustle into their full-time gig, is they are having fun, and actually it doesn't feel like work to them because they enjoy what they're doing so much, and actually they're putting in so many hours into their thing because they just love it, and actually for them it's their hobby as much as anything, their work, if that makes sense. So yeah, who knows? In a year's time, ask me again and I might have a different answer for you.
Yeah, but right now you're having this really great answer. That's enough for right now, I think so. I mean, we'll never know whether we'll be alive after this, 2 to 3 months. I don't know. I mean, like, not being negative, but just saying the practicality of what's coming at us, because 2020 has almost been it's like half of the end of the world. So first, like, wars came, then Corona came, and actually my guys are actually, we are like, this the big guy of meme creators. Okay, we have, like, in our state, okay, it's like we have really vivid imaginative meme creators we have. So a guy created a meme saying that, so first, this war came, then COVID-19 came, the next, then aliens will come, then zombies will come. Obviously, the world may be taken over by someone else. So these predictions are actually happening. So if we're alive after that, I think the answer right now is actually pure enough for that. I think so. So sorry. So what's your actually thoughts on this? Actually, kind of another SEO question. It's kind of really interesting because I've seen a lot of Facebook groups always ask these questions, that should we have a separate page for the podcast, because you have one. You have your own name in that, but it's kind of related to your podcast. So should you have a separate page for it, or is just with the one personal brand and everything?
I guess the answer depends. If you are a business looking to start a podcast, then I think it makes sense to keep it separate from your personal brand. If you're like me, however, and actually you don't mind if the two kind of get mixed up, then I think it saves a lot of time, for one thing, just having one page. You're not having to post twice as much content. It's just one lot of content. So yeah, I guess it depends. And, it depends how much, excuse me, can enjoy voice. I guess it depends as well how much time you're willing to put into social media. For me, I don't want it to be all-consuming. I do spend a lot of time kind of reaching out to guests and to new connections and kind of building those relationships. But at the same time, I wouldn't want to spend any more than a couple of hours a day doing that sort of stuff. So, yeah, I think ideally, if you can, then producing as much content as you can is always a good thing, and quality content at that. And if you've got multiple pages to do that, then great. For me, people get hung up on this. People have asked me this as well. Like, should I have a separate page for my podcast compared to just my personal brand? Personally, I don't think it matters that much. As long as you're putting out good quality content, people are going to find it either way. But if you are a business owner, then it probably makes more sense to have them separate. It just depends.
Yeah, I think it totally depends on the person. So okay. So this is actually kind of pop up time in my head, is that what do you actually think is a probable, like, how to say, this guy is the ideal guest for my podcast. Okay, because my kind of goal for my podcast is that I'll have the set of questions. I mean, like sometimes I kind of frame, other times what I actually do is that whatever you say, I actually take questions from that and I will ask you. Depends on the podcasting, as it goes. But I asked this, Lucy also how it actually goes. She actually picks her guest. She said that whoever she finds really interesting to talk to, she does that. Just she goes on, ask them to come out to the podcast and do. But what do you actually do? What's your goal, when it comes to this podcasting?
Very similar to Lucy. Yeah, I don't tend to, I don't have, for example, like a kind of set criteria or any boundaries to kind of bring people onto the show. It is people I just want to have a chat with because they seem really interesting or they're doing really cool things. So to kind of give an idea of that, yeah, people I've had on the podcast, I've mentioned Josh, who's traveling around the world with his best mate, shooting travels for videos for like MTV, Panasonic. TikTok DJ artist Erin, she's amazing as well, doing really cool things. I've recently had on digital nomads called Louise and Sam, who'll be appearing on very shortly, who actually traveling around the world as well, and but doing very different things. So Louise, for example, she creates Udemy courses, which I don't know if that's a thing in India, might not be actually. But Udemy is a platform that allows people to create online courses and then sell them to people. So she does that, and she's making like 5 figures passive income a month just from Udemy, and then she's got other projects as well. Sam, very similar to Louise in that sense. She makes money from actually podcast consulting, which wouldn't have been a job a few years ago, but it is now, and she does really well from that. Yeah, it's just people I've kind of bumped into online, through Instagram, LinkedIn. And kind of connections of connections. So I got to meet Louise through a guy called Alex, who I know very well. He's been an amazing mentor to me. And just kind of, just natural connections. Like I said, I don't have any set criteria as such. It's just people who I think are having fun, don't have to have a business even. I've had a few people who are just doing 9-to-5 jobs like myself, but they maybe got a side gig on. Girl called Zoe is an amazing yoga tutor, and she teaches yoga on the weekends and has a 9-to-5 during the week, and she's really cool. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of people, and like I say, no set criteria, just people I want to chat to and who I think are interesting. I think my audience will enjoy hearing from as well.
Yeah. Just as I said that, your audience will enjoy it. That's my my how to say intriguing thought is that how it actually that your audience might enjoy it, because it's totally based on you, because you always go and chat with the person that you are interested to look at. That's what exactly what Lucy also said, is that it's not much care about the audience, but how it actually, if she is finding someone interesting to talk to and everything and all, so she will get on the podcast. So how do you actually find out if that podcast will blow up, or will get as much listeners as it possibly could when it comes to this releasing out? So is it totally on you, or do you consider it as an audience also?
I think how I approach it is, if kind of similar to Luce, I guess, if I'm enjoying it, then I think my audience will enjoy it, just because my podcast is kind of aimed at people like myself. I try to base it around what do I want to get out of this? Why have I started this podcast? Because let's face it, there's a lot of podcasts out there, lots of things you can be listening to. So why did I create my podcast? And I guess it was to answer those questions of how can business be fun? What practices, what systems, what techniques do people have to actually, 1, build a business or creative project, but 2, make it fun, actually doing what they want to do. So that was what I wanted to get out of it. And from what I've heard, I always try and ask for as much feedback as I can. So I get very kind of technical and very specific on this. So when people reach out to me, just to leave a comment on Instagram or LinkedIn or email me, which happens occasionally, I try and ask 4 questions. And these 4 questions have come from a guy called JLD, who I got the chance to speak with a few months ago now, prior to the launch. And he said, he's a very successful podcaster and makes like 6 figures a month. Anyway, he said, ask people 4 questions. First question, what do you like about the podcast? Very simple, gets you some really good stuff. Second question, what don't you like about the podcast? Equally important. And actually, if you can get your people that's reached out to be really critical about your podcast, don't sugarcoat things, just say it as it is. that's really useful feedback to have as well. So what don't you like about the podcast? Some feedback I've had on that question has been my intro's too long. So I'm looking to make that a bit shorter, that people want to hear my voice a little bit more in the interview. So not just me asking questions, but also trying to engage in conversation a little bit more. So I'm trying to make more of an effort to do that. So that's just a couple of things. There's like a whole bunch of things people have said. And of course, you'd have to listen to all that feedback. Some of it, you might just ignore, and that's happened as well. But that's the second question. Third question, how did you find out about my show? I think that's a really useful thing to find out, because it's like, you can create, or you can target more of your promoting strategies to those things. So, for example, if you're finding a lot of people are finding your podcast through Instagram comments, your name pop up somewhere on someone else's post because you've commented, then that tells you, okay, I need to be doing more of that because that's working. Equally, if you're finding out that no one is coming through another channel, then it's like, well, I'm not going to focus my efforts there anymore because it's just not generating any results. So that's the third question. Then the fourth and final question that JLD told me, more specifically relating if you're wanting to monetize a podcast, which I do have plans for further down the line, but for me, it's not really that important at the moment. That is, what problem are you facing right now? Sounds very simple. And the reason for this question is, if you're looking to find out what someone's problems are, then you can potentially create a product or service for them. Or you can also bring on a sponsor for your show who may be able to solve that problem for them. So to give you another example, say you find out that someone has a problem with bookkeeping or running the finances for their business. In that case, you might be able to bring on a sponsor like QuickBooks or FreshBooks, which are cloud computing accounting software companies. So they might be able to provide that solution to your listeners. So things like that, asking for feedback. Those 4 questions have been invaluable. Definitely recommend them to anyone looking to start a podcast. And like I guess the top line is just have fun. And actually if you're enjoying the podcast, if you're enjoying the recordings, then hopefully your audience will as well. I think it's something I try not to get too hung up on. If I'm enjoying it, hopefully my audience will be as well.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, yawning is contagious. So if you enjoy, it's like, people will also enjoy, I think. So that kind of analogy will actually, kind of work. So yeah, I think just to get off this, podcasting stuff, is that I always ask this guest, just in the middle, is that who was the last person? It's actually morning or, evening in that time, in your side.
What was that? Sorry?
In your time, is it actually morning or evening? Your time frame.
It's kind of early evening. Yeah, it's about 5 p.m. Yeah, it's a fairly early.
All right. So, who was the last person that you made smile today?
That is a very good question. Probably yourself, just through Zoom here. I haven't really seen anyone today apart from my mum and dad. So. Did I make my mum and dad? I suppose I made my mum smile this morning, just cracked a few jokes, so that would probably be the last person.
Oh, that's great. Because it's just that actually I had this question from a guy called Joe Pardo. He was actually on my show earlier, and he said that when you actually can answer this question properly, like without thinking really a lot, then you actually made some kind of achievement in your life. Because that's what it's all about, being happy and, telling people about this happiness. So, yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I always ask this question, is that kind of thing. So just one more thing before going on to the final thing is that you said the monetization of podcasts, sometimes it doesn't matter a lot. I think when a sponsor actually, approaches you saying that, just talk about this product, because Tim Ferriss actually, I've never actually listened a lot to Tim Ferriss. Recently only I'm listening because I was really a fan of Gary Vayner Chuck, podcast. Because of his enthusiasm itself, I actually listen a lot of his podcast. I mean, if Tim Ferriss, it will be like your voice, it will be like slow and steady and will be going and things like that. And he actually kind of had this sponsor advertisement for literally 7 minutes. The first 7 minutes were full of, for sponsorship. So for a guy like Tim Ferriss, the conversion rate may be really high. That's actually something that's really known for us. But if someone is starting out as, having 1,000 listeners or 2,000 listeners, and someone is approaching that, please, sponsor, advertise my product in your podcast. And if the guy who's sponsoring doesn't get actual conversions as he expected, do you think it will cause a problem to the, podcaster? If he gives statement saying that you will get this much of, conversion rate or anything like that, will it actually cause a problem like that?
Yeah, it will. I think the kind of, I guess the short answer is the business will probably just not sponsor them again. I guess depending how long the contract is, I think typically sort of 3 or 4 months, they kind of trial things out just to see how that sponsorship will work. If it's not working after that, if they're not getting those conversions, then the sponsor will just drop them, because there's lots of podcasts out there, and there's lots of other potential people they can sponsor and potential shows they can sponsor. I think that's definitely one thing to be aware of sponsor wise. I guess the other thing is, by actually bringing a sponsor on board, I guess you're kind of diluting your show a little bit. And what I mean by that is you're sending people away from your show pretty much, aren't you? You're directing them to, say, another business or another company or another podcast. Even that's happening now. Podcast sponsors are getting sponsored by other podcasts. So you're kind of diluting your show in that sense. So I'm always kind of wary, and it's certainly not something I'm looking to do anytime soon. And I think even if I get to the point where I've got a lot more listeners listening to my show than I currently do, then will I bring a sponsor on board? I'm not sure. I think that, or there are probably better ways to monetize a podcast. Products and service being one thing, affiliates as another thing. Membership content. There's a bunch of different ways you can do it. Sponsorship's kind of just the one that's seen as being most popular. Yeah, Tim Ferriss though. Yeah, you're right. His sponsors take up like 5-7 minutes of every show, and for one thing, I actually quite like them in a strange way. And the reason for that is because his kind of vetting process for his sponsors is so rigorous that actually he only ever kind of recommends really good companies. Like just the other day, he had a company, it was a VPN network.
ExpressVPN.
That was the one.
Yeah, actually, I heard the podcast with Hugh Jackman. Yeah.
Such a good podcast, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was really, really awesome. Oh my God. It was.
I was like writing so many notes down on my phone as I was going for a walk, listening to it. Amazing podcast. And so actually that's a company I didn't know about, and now because he's recommended them, I might check them out if I ever need a VPN. So I think they do certainly have their benefits. I know Tim actually did an experiment a few months ago where he actually stopped having sponsors on his show, and you'd think, okay, that must be a good thing for his audience, right? They're not having to listen to sponsors as much, and I think he was asking people to kind of leave donations for his show instead, like on Patreon or something like that. And he found that most people actually wanted the sponsors. Strangely, they actually enjoyed listening to them. They got a lot of products, and they got recommendations from Tim directly about products they didn't know about. So it's an interesting one. I think just because of his numbers, that he's such a big podcaster now. When he gets so many downloads, he can probably afford to spend that much time at the beginning of his shows recommending sponsors. I certainly wouldn't recommend that for the average Joe. Most listeners will just switch off after a minute, so it's only because he's kind of built that relationship over the last decade that he's been able to do that, I guess. But amazing podcaster, one I'm very much looking to emulate, I guess.
Yeah, of course, it obviously happened because, and it's really hard when it comes to, if you sponsor like for a product, because your podcasting, audience range really wide. Like it depends on many people, because if Joe Rogan is kind of, having a podcast, or Tim Ferriss, because their, this audience, demographics and everything is kind of like everyone, literally everyone he can have as a listener. But, for some people, it's not like that. So if they are like really, really have to be careful for the product as well, it's like they have to be a podcaster and also as a marketing manager, thinking that whether this product will actually work in my podcast or not. So yeah, I think it's going to be a pretty tough one on that. So just one final thing before closing is that, what do you actually think is the best tip that you can provide to a fellow podcaster in order to grow? Best tip in the world according to you?
Best tip I would give, what I give, is somewhat accidentally I did this, but it wasn't because I meant to do it. And actually I had a podcast prior to Entrepreneurs Can Party, which was, I guess, like a testing ground for me. And I didn't realize it at the time, but it enabled me to kind of try out different formats of the show. Did I want to have guests on my show, or did I just want it to be with solo episodes, just me speaking into a microphone? Did I want co-hosts on the podcast, or was it just going to be myself? Who did I want to interview if I was to interview people? That sort of thing, that sort of tests that I ran. And so, yeah, that's what I did. I had, like I said, I had a podcast prior to this one, and I recommend it to everyone looking to get started. If you can experiment with a podcast, and you don't have to tell anyone about it, you don't have to spread the word about it. It can just be something you do on the side, like in your own spare time, and get used to talking to a microphone and recording and listening to yourself speak, which can sound very strange when you're not used to it. Just kind of experimenting with the technology, working out all the technical stuff on the back end of the hosting. Yeah, that's one tip I always give. Just maybe try out a podcast. You can figure out how to do it quite easily. There's lots of resources online, and a guy called Pat Flynn, who you might be aware of, who might not be. He's got an amazing YouTube series, I believe.
Smart Passive Income, I think so. Yeah, he's kind of...
That's the guy, Pat Flynn, Smart Passive Income. He's got some really good YouTube videos on that, exactly like how to set it up, what equipment you need. You don't need to pay any money for any of this stuff. You can just use your laptop mic if you wanted to. Anchor FM, great free podcasting host. There's so many ways to get started for free. So I guess that's a tip in itself as well. So yeah, tip number one, if you can start a podcast, just trial a few things out without, not being like the mothership. It's just like a trial run. Do that if you can. And then the other thing, don't feel like you have to spend any money on podcasting. You really don't. I mean, obviously, if you want to kind of upgrade, you can get more fancy microphones, you can pay for hosting, but to begin with, you certainly don't need to pay any money. Those would be my tips.
Definitely. And, I actually have this, annual blueprint here right now. It's actually really hard, trust me. I actually have these, I should take this printout right now, but you actually frame this really tough. Okay. You have to frame this really, really tough. It's kind of really hard to actually answer, some of the questions itself, because if I think, how to say, 2 to 3 things, my really sometimes good memories pop up into my head, but other times really bad memories pop up into my head saying that if you have gone through that, what actually have you achieved, things like that. So guys, please go and, check him out. His annual book. It's a really awesome one. So go and check him out. And is there anything else you want to ask me? That was last.
I just want to say thank you for having me on, Jeffrey. It's been really fun chatting with you and getting to speak with you today. If people want to kind of find out more about what I'm doing, I guess, then the place I'd direct them to is scottstockdale.co.uk/trailer. The reason for that is I appreciate that listening to a brand new podcast is quite cumbersome, giving up your time, if it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, however long an episode is, I appreciate it's a big chunk of time. So I have my very short, I think it's like 1 minute trailer on there, so you can get a flavour of what Entrepreneurs Can Party is about if you fancy checking that out. Some really cool resources on there as well, as you alluded to, the annual blueprint strategic life plan, full of 96 thought-provoking questions to kind of make you think about how you can make 2020 your best year yet, or post-corona 2021, and other resources as well, like how to hire a virtual assistant, which is a very detailed breakdown of that, my complete guide, how to rank in the top 10 of Apple Podcasts in 6 days, or at least how I did that and how you can do that as a podcaster as well, potentially. All my podcasting costs to date. There's a bunch of resources on there. So yeah, scottstockdale.co.uk/trailer if you're interested. But otherwise, really appreciate your time today, Jeffrey. It's been awesome chatting with you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, guys. And I have given every link in the description that you can go and check him out. No worries. And if you have any question, you can leave in the comment section below. I will direct it to him. Or, if it's possible for me to answer, I will do it, because he's a really busy man, but still he will reply for that. So definitely I will, tell him as well. So guys, thanks for listening to the podcast. And if there's anything else, just let us know. Then we'll be happy to reply for that. And Mr. Stockdale, God, it's really hard to pronounce your name, man. So thanks so much for being on the podcast. Yeah, it is. You on the podcast. And guys, I'll see you in the next season.